Wiesz, ja specjalnie się nie lubię, więc staram się jak najrzadziej się postrzegać. Tak, kiedyś zrobiłem taki film dokumentalny, który się nazywał Gadające głowy. I zadawałem tam ludziom tylko 2 pytania. Kim jesteś i czego byś chciał? I oczywiście potem, jak już zrobiłem ten film, to się zastanowiłem sam nad tymi 2 pytaniami. I właściwie, prawdę mówiąc, zrozumiałem, że nie potrafię na te pytania odpowiedzieć. Ani nie wiem, kim jestem, ani nie wiem, czego bym chciał. Jeżeli czegokolwiek bym chciał, to bym chciał spokoju, a właściwie nigdy go nie uzyskałem i chyba wiem, że już go nigdy nie uzyskam. Czyli to, czego naprawdę chcę, nigdy nie będę miał.
To jest gwiazdka, na którą czekaliśmy, żeby zacząć Wigilię. Widzisz? A tam, niżej, jest taka mgła. Popatrz. To są miliony małych gwiazdek. Pokaż.
In Poland, in 1968, a little girl looks up into the stars in the winter sky with her mother, who identifies the Christmas Eve star. In France, a little girl is shown one of the first leaves of spring by her mother, who points out the fine veins running through at the exact same moment in time. 2 twin souls, living in the same universe, but 2 separate lives. A man who gets to relive a deciding moment multiple times. Humans trapped by rules of virtue, and 3 protagonists who search for liberty, justice, and fraternity. This is the world created by the late Polish master filmmaker Krzysztof Kieślowski. His certain sense of opposing ideals, historical significance, and duality of life brought a new perspective of perceiving life and the missed opportunities that we always recollect in our minds. What if I could change the past? What if I had lived another life? This is Kieślowski's Dialectic Duality, and this is his perception towards life. In 1957, young Krzysztof Kieślowski had no immediate goals in life. His ambition to work as a firefighter was left unaccomplished, and he waited patiently for fate to take him to his future destination in life. Finally, his uncle, who worked in the College for Theatre Technicians in Warsaw at the time, persuaded him to study theatre direction. Perhaps a career path Kieślowski would have never dreamed of taking, if not for his uncle's connection. And in 1964, Kieślowski entered the Łódź Film School of Poland, and from there on, worked his way into making documentaries and fiction films for Polish television, which ultimately made him one of the greatest filmmakers of the modern century. But what if all this never happened? What if in some parallel universe, Kieślowski was never persuaded by his uncle to take up arts, and instead continued on his career as an engineer like his father before him, or a firefighter? Could there perhaps be a possibility that in some unknown universe, our world was never introduced to the filmmaking of Kieślowski? These are some of the elements of Kieślowski's film philosophy: a world of doppelgangers, unforeseeable chances, and the clash of ideas and emotions. His characters are always conflicted by making the right decision in life, indulging in non-linear progress of history, and of course, the pursuit of happiness. As rational beings, we are confronted every day of making the right judgment in life. Once accomplished, we do tend to look back and wonder how things might have turned out if given the opportunity once again. Do we regret our past decisions, our childhood upbringing, a point of view towards how the world should be governed? Love, history, politics, and happiness always played key roles in Kieślowski's life, and in turn, they are the narrative pillars of his work. The concept of opposing ideas in historical progress also intrigued the 18th century German philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. His theory of history focuses on certain key elements in life that parallel Kieślowski's narrative. History has always been a conflict of ideas. The reason why we understand and believe in the theory A is only because of the existence of the opposing theory B. The contrast and clash of ideas is what molds and shapes progress of humanity, which leads us to one of the most famous equations in modern philosophy: thesis plus antithesis equals synthesis. In the school of philosophy, this is known as the dialectic approach. The construction of many Kieślowski's films were born out of the same conflict of ideas. In one of the most defining films of his career, Blind Chance, the purpose in life for the character of Wittek is happiness. After the sudden death of his father, Wittek is perplexed in which direction should he walk towards. Throughout many years of hard work, he had studied to become a professional doctor, but the last uttered words of his dying father somehow convinced him that he was dissatisfied with his current career path. These recent events compelled Wittek to catch a train to Warsaw and figure out the future for himself, perhaps all too similar to Kieślowski's youth and arguably his most personal film. The film Blind Chance is then divided into three different timelines in the life of Wittek. In narrative A, Wittek safely catches the train to Warsaw and becomes a member of the State Communist Party. In narrative B, Wittek misses his train, gets into trouble with the railway guard, and while in community service, finds God, which compels him to denounce the state communist propaganda, a pure negation of idea of the first scenario. Ironically, even though the clash of ideas between narrative A and B are obvious, the career path of radical ideas and defiance are all too similar. A roll of dice is the path of blind chance in life. And finally, in narrative C, Wittek yet again misses the train, but ends up meeting his future wife at the train station. He returns back to medical school, becomes a doctor, gets married, and becomes apathetic towards both political ideals. As mentioned earlier, the dialectic approach of Hegel focuses on clash of ideals. Human history is riddled with missteps and extreme ideological schools of thought. Kieślowski's approach to the life of Wittek is certainly a dialectic one. It's almost as if Kieślowski acts as God, giving Wittek multiple chances to redeem himself by changing the past event. The thesis of narrative A, combined with the antithesis of narrative B, equals the synthesis of narrative C. The film Blind Chance is the dialogue of Kieślowski, a dialectic approach towards many facades of life. As Joseph Kikosola mentions in his book, The Films of Krzysztof Kieślowski, The Liminal Image. Though not a Marxist, Kieślowski did approach questions in a dialectical manner. Rarely did he allow one side of an issue to be simply demonized or another to escape unscathed. An alternative model to the opposing powers of the dialect is the dialogue, featuring partial truths coming together to contribute to a larger, more complete picture of an issue. The truth is that Kieślowski vacillated between two opposing scenarios in life, hoping to reach the unanswered questions to the synthesis and the dialogue of human progress.
Qu'est-ce qu'il y a? T'es triste?
Non. Je sais pas pourquoi. C'est comme si j'avais du chagrin.
Pour quelqu'un?
Je sais pas.
But Kieślowski, I feel, goes even further than the dialectic approach of Hegel's theory of history. His historical perspective is always riddled with ambiguity and duality. But sometimes, Kieślowski's concept of dialectic duality is taken literally, as we see in his later works like The Double Life of Veronique and Three Colors Rouge. The Double Life of Veronique is a story of a woman played by Irene Jacob, living two slightly different lives in the same universe. In 1990, a young Polish woman by the name of Weronika, with the W, is a talented opera singer, while the other, Veronique, born and raised in France, also works as a musician. Physically, they're both identical twins, only being spiritually aware of each other's existence. Unlike German idealists at the time, Hegel denied that the world does not rotate on ideas or beliefs, but rather the conflict of it, which is why the progress of humanity is always non-linear. After 30 minutes into The Double Life of Veronique, Veronica in Poland suddenly dies of a heart attack, which somehow leaves Veronique perplexed, looking for answers of her own. And this is where I feel Kieślowski's dialectic duality differs from Hegel's perception of the present. Unlike Hegel's dialectic, Kieślowski's approach, although literal on the surface, is ambiguous in its execution. The Double Life of Veronique represents the dependence of ideas, but not in opposing stances, but rather more spiritual connection between the two, an idea that Hegel's dialectic would want nothing to do with. Near the end of the film, Veronique finds a picture of her twin Veronica in Poland, taken shortly before her death. This leaves her emotionally devastated, but her lover creates two identical marionettes of her, in case one of them gets damaged or lost. What is important to note is that Kieślowski started off as a documentary maker and turned towards fiction because he wanted to tell personal individual stories, something he felt was not possible in the medium of documentary without invading someone's privacy. Kieślowski's earlier films like Camera Buff, No End, Blind Chance, and the Decalogue series are highly inspired by Hegel's dialectic, but with the double life of Veronique, he soon played around with thematic elements of ideas, fate, doppelgangers, and kismet. This film is arguably the birth of Kieślowski's dialectic duality, and thus creating a sharp contrast between Kieślowski's earlier raw, erratic work to his later philosophical films.
Sale kinowe świecą pustkami, szczególnie na krótkim filmie o zabijaniu. Czy nie ma pan z tego powodu takiego kompleksu Machulskiego?
Kompleks Machulskiego? A co to jest kompleks Machulskiego?
No to jest kompleks, który powinien mieć reżyser wobec innego reżysera, na którego filmy ludzie bardzo chętnie chodzą.
Znaczy ma pan na myśli, powiedzmy, kompleks Bergmana wobec Spielberga, tak? Żeby porównywać te gatunki. Nie sądzę, żeby Bergman miał jakikolwiek kompleks wobec Spielberga.
History has always played an important role in the narrative of Kieślowski's films. In Three Colors Bleu, Julie wants to escape her past to start anew. In Three Colors Blanc, Polish immigrant Karol wants to turn a series of unfortunate events around in order to win back the heart of his ex-wife Dominique. But a most prominent story recurrence has to be in Three Colors Rouge, and arguably the most dialectic Kieślowski film of all. The film tells the story of two young lawyers who become judges in the same universe, but confusingly, in two different periods of time. The first lawyer turned judge is now a bitter old man, still reminiscing on his past misfortunes, while the second lawyer turned judge is still young and is experiencing those misfortunes in the present period of time. As Hegel once famously remarked regarding the historical events, all facts and personages of great importance in world history occur as it were twice. In Rouge, the life of two judges follow an eerily similar path to self-loathing, a coincidence of the textbook falling on the exact same passage that would be present in the examination, which would ultimately succeed them into becoming a judge. But shortly after, the love of his life will cheat on him with another man, and in the end, the lawyer turned judge will detach himself from the rest of humanity, bitter and heartbroken. But not all hope is lost. The redemption of this tragedy is Valentine, played by Irene Jacob. She enters the life of the old retired judge, and perhaps in a long time, he feels that there is faith in humanity after all. Now, it could be argued that by repetition of history, Hegel meant that humanity's ignorance gets the better of them, and we are bound to repeat mistakes of our past. In his lectures on the philosophy of history, Hegel mentions, "What experience in history teaches this, that nations and governments have never learned anything from history, or acted upon any lessons they might have drawn from it. The deciding factor of the lives of these two judges is Valentine, a woman who could change the course of history for perhaps both of these judges." As we near the end of the film, the 7 survivors of the ferry include the young judge August and Valentine, revealed in a TV freeze frame, hiding the fact that the tragedy of the past might be averted after all. Perhaps a bit more optimistic approach towards Hegel's historical recurrence. As many would know, after the completion of Three Colors Rouge, Kieślowski announced his retirement from filmmaking. In my opinion, Rouge is a film that encompasses Kieślowski's dialectic duality the finest. And perhaps Kieślowski felt he said everything he could with this film and wanted to take his leave from filmmaking forever.
Od tego roku, nawet od 15-14 lat, zrozumiałem, że właściwie gówno mnie obchodzi społeczeństwo. Że społeczeństwo to jest w wypadku polskim 40 milionów pojedynczych ludzi. I że tak naprawdę co mnie obchodzi, to pojedynczy człowiek.
One of the biggest differences between Hegel and Kieślowski is the intimacy. Hegel's approach to his philosophical outlook was arguably more broader in perspective of the course of human history, while Kieślowski is actually just the opposite. In his mind, the collective dialectic may dictate the sense of progress, but it is in fact the individuals that change the course of history. Fate is always a decisive entity in life, where a single action can leave multiple unanswered questions behind. This is what always fascinated Krzysztof Kieślowski. In his interviews, he always stated that if his uncle had never worked in the College of Theatre Technicians, he would have most certainly taken a completely different career path. What if he was never persuaded to become a filmmaker? Although it is impossible to determine that scenario, one fact is most certainly clear. This world would have been deprived of Kieślowski's works, a fate that I feel should never be compromised on. And with that thought, the dialectic duality remains a key component of modern theory of filmmaking.